The massive space station Nexus Prime floated in the cold darkness of space, its metal hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. Inside the main chamber, hundreds of alien beings sat in rows of seats, their voices creating a low buzz of anger and worry. The Galactic Council had called an emergency meeting, and everyone knew why. Representative Zixthara stepped forward to the center of the room. Her green scales caught the bright lights as she moved, and her yellow eyes swept across the crowd. She was from the Reptilian Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful groups in the galaxy. When she spoke, her voice was sharp and filled with hate. "My fellow council members," she began, her forked tongue flicking out between her words. "We face a threat unlike any we have seen before. The humans have spread like a disease across our galaxy. They have taken 17 star systems in just 10 years. They ignore our borders. They steal our trade routes. They act as if they own the entire galaxy." Angry sounds came from the crowd. Some aliens hissed, others growled, and a few made clicking noises that meant they agreed. The blue-skinned Aquatic Federation representative stood up, water dripping from his gills. "The humans have built colonies on sacred worlds," he said, his voice bubbling with rage. "They dig into planets that have been holy to us for thousands of years. They have no respect for our ancient ways." The crowd grew louder. More aliens stood up to speak. A creature that looked like a walking crystal complained about human mining operations. A being covered in fur talked about lost profits from trade. A robot-like alien spoke in electronic beeps about territorial violations. Zixthara raised her clawed hand for silence. "I have here," she said, holding up a golden tablet, "the formal declaration of war against the human species. All 53 members of the Galactic Council have signed it. We demand that humans leave all disputed territories within 30 days. If they refuse, we will use force to remove them." The crowd cheered and applauded. War drums began to beat. In the background, played by the warrior clans. The sound echoed through the station like thunder, far away from the angry aliens. Captain Jake Sullivan sat in his comfortable chair on the bridge of the human research ship Discovery. He was 40 years old, with gray hair starting to show at his temples. His coffee mug sat on the arm of his chair, still warm and smelling like home. The ship was quiet except for the soft hum of engines and computers. A young communications officer named Tony walked up to Jake with a tablet in his hands. "Captain," he said, trying not to smile, "we just received an official message from the Galactic Council." Jake took the tablet and began to read. His eyes moved down the long document, filled with fancy words and angry threats. As he read, a small smile appeared on his face. Then he began to chuckle. By the time he finished reading, he was laughing out loud. "What's so funny, Captain?" asked Dr. Lisa Parker, the ship's expert on alien life. She was a smart woman in her 30s, with short brown hair and curious eyes. Jake handed her the tablet. "Read this," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "They're declaring war on us." Lisa read the document, her eyebrows rising higher with each paragraph. "They're upset about the mining operation on Kepler 442b, she said. "They claim we're destroying ancient burial grounds." "Ancient burial grounds," Jake repeated, still laughing. "Our scans showed that planet has been empty rock for 3 million years. Not even bacteria live there." The bridge crew gathered around to hear the news. They passed the tablet from person to person, each one reading parts of the declaration. Out loud, the threats sounded so serious and important that they became funny. "Listen to this part," said engineer Carlos Martinez, reading from the tablet. "The humans shall face the wrath of 1,000 suns and the fury of the stellar winds." He looked up with a grin. "What does that even mean?" "Back on Earth, President Alan Carter received the same message in his office at the White House. He was a tall man with silver hair who had led the planet through many difficult times. His advisors gathered around his desk, all of them reading copies of the War Declaration. "Mr. President," said his Chief of Staff, Mary Johnson, "this is serious. They're talking about tens of thousands of ships." President Carter leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Mary, do you remember when I was a kid and the school bully threatened to beat me up?" "No, sir," Mary replied, confused. "I laughed at him too," the president said. "Some threats are so ridiculous that laughter is the only proper response." Within hours, news of the War Declaration spread across all human colonies. From the busy cities of Alpha Centauri to the farming settlements on the edge of known space, humans everywhere had the same reaction. They laughed. In the mining colonies of the asteroid belt, workers told jokes about alien warriors while they dug for rare metals. On the ocean world of Aqua Nova, fishermen made bets about how long the war would last. Children in schools across human space drew pictures of funny-looking aliens running away from human ships. Admiral Kate Morrison stood before the United Earth Assembly, the governing body for all human colonies. She was a tough woman who had spent her whole life in space, commanding fleets and exploring new worlds. The assembly hall was packed with representatives from every human world. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and clear, "we are officially at war with 53 alien species. Their combined fleets have over 30,000 ships. They have weapons we've never seen and technology that's thousands of years old." The hall became quiet. Some people looked worried for the first time. Admiral Morrison smiled. "They also have no idea what they're getting into." The assembly exploded with cheers and applause. Representatives stood up and clapped, whistled, and shouted approval. The sound was so loud it could be heard in the streets outside. On Kepler 442b, the mining colony that had started all the trouble, colonist leader Paul Anderson gathered his people in the main hall. There were only 300 humans on the entire planet, mostly miners and their families. They had come to this empty world to dig for rare elements that Earth needed. "I know you've all heard the news," Paul said to the crowd. "The Galactic Council says we're trespassing on sacred ground. They want us to leave." An old miner named Frank stood up. "This place was dead when we got here," he said. "We've been here 5 years and never seen so much as a bug." "That's right," Paul replied. "But they're coming to make us leave anyway. The question is, are we going?" The crowd shouted no, so loudly that dust fell from the ceiling. Back on Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council was making final preparations for war. Fleets were gathering from across the galaxy. Weapons were being loaded. Battle plans were being made. The greatest military force in galactic history was preparing to crush the human colonies. But in the intelligence section of the station, Officer Kellenoth was reading human communications with growing confusion. The humans weren't acting like any enemy he had ever seen. Instead of fear or anger, their messages were full of jokes and laughter. He walked to his commander's office and knocked on the door. "Enter," came the reply. Kellenoth stepped inside and saluted. "Sir, I've been monitoring human communications. Their reaction to our war declaration is ... unusual." "How so?" asked the commander. "They're laughing at us, sir." The commander's face showed no emotion. "Fear makes some species act strangely. When we arrive with our fleets, their laughter will turn to screams." But Kellenoth had been studying humans. For years, he knew something his commander didn't. When humans laughed at danger, it usually meant the danger was in trouble. While alien fleets gathered across the galaxy, humans were getting ready for war in their own special way. On Luna Base, the military station built inside Earth's moon, Colonel Steve Hayes walked through busy hallways filled with engineers and soldiers. Everyone was working fast, but they were also smiling and joking with each other. "How are we doing on the ship conversions?" Steve asked his assistant, Lieutenant Amy White. "Better than expected, sir," Amy replied, looking at her tablet. "We've got over 2,000 civilian ships volunteering for military duty. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, even some luxury yachts. Their owners want to help fight." Steve nodded. "What about weapons?" "That's where it gets interesting," Amy said with a grin. "The miners are offering their industrial lasers. The construction crews have plasma cutters. Even the farmers want to donate their crop sprayers." "Crop sprayers?" Steve asked, confused. "They think we can fill them with acid or something nasty," Amy explained. "The farmers are very creative when they're angry." In the research labs deep inside Luna Base, Dr. Amy Chun was working on something that would change space warfare forever. She was a small woman with bright eyes who had spent years studying physics and weapons technology. Her latest creation sat on a metal table, looking like nothing more than a black box with blinking lights. "What exactly does it do?" asked General Bob Miller, who had come to see the new weapon. "It's a gravity manipulator," Amy explained, touching the device gently. "We call it Newton's Revenge. It can make gravity stronger or weaker in a small area of space." "How is that a weapon?" Bob asked. Amy smiled. "Imagine an enemy ship flying toward you. Suddenly, gravity around their ship becomes 10 times stronger. The ship gets crushed by its own weight. Or we can make gravity disappear completely. The ship tears itself apart when it tries to turn." Bob stared at the device. "That's terrifying." "That's the idea," Amy said cheerfully. Across the solar system, Captain Rick Turner was getting his cargo ship ready for war. The Defiant was a big, ugly ship designed to carry ore and supplies between planets. It had thick armor and powerful engines, but no weapons at all. That was about to change. Rick stood in the ship's cargo bay with his crew of 20 miners and dock workers. They were all volunteers who had decided to side and stay instead of running away to safety. "Okay, everyone," Rick said, pointing to the massive industrial equipment around them. "We've got mining lasers that can cut through solid rock. We've got magnetic cranes that can lift 50 tons. We've got cargo containers made of the toughest metal in human space. How do we turn all this into weapons?" Old Pete, a miner who had worked in space for 40 years, raised his hand. "The mining lasers are easy. We just point them at enemy ships instead of asteroids." "Good," Rick said. "What else?" "The magnetic cranes," suggested Maria Santos, the ship's engineer. "We can use them to grab enemy missiles and throw them back." "The cargo containers," added young Danny Kim. "Fill them with rocks and shoot them out of the cargo bay. Simple kinetic weapons." Rick smiled. His crew was already thinking like warriors. On Earth, the news channels were having a field day with the war declaration. Reporter Helen Brooks stood outside the United Nations building in New York, talking to her camera. "This is day 3 since the Galactic Council declared war on humanity," she said. "Instead of panic, we're seeing something unprecedented. Recruitment centers are overwhelmed with volunteers. Civilian ships are lining up to be converted into warships. And perhaps strangest of all, someone has started selling T-shirts that say, 'I survived the galactic war,' even though the war hasn't really started yet." In coffee shops and bars across Earth, people were making jokes about the aliens. Comedy shows on television spent entire episodes making fun of the war declaration. Someone had created a popular song called 53 Angry Aliens that was playing on every radio station, but not everyone was laughing. In a secret meeting room in Geneva, the world's top military leaders were planning seriously for the coming fight. "The aliens have superior numbers," said Admiral Kate Morrison, pointing to a holographic display of the galaxy. But numbers aren't everything. We have advantages they don't know about, such as? Asked General Linda Carter from the Space Marines. Flexibility, Kate replied. Their fleets are organized and traditional. They follow ancient rules of warfare. We don't have ancient rules. We make things up as we go. Is that good or bad? Linda asked. For us, good. For them, very bad. Meanwhile, in the outer colonies, humans were preparing in their own unique ways. On the farming world of New Iowa, colonists were turning tractors into armored vehicles. They welded metal plates to farming equipment and mounted hunting rifles. On the sides, it's not much, said Farmer Joe Brown to his neighbor Bill White. But if any aliens land here, they're going to get a surprise. My wife is making explosive fertilizer bombs, Bill replied. She says if it can blow up tree stumps, it can blow up spaceships. On the mining asteroid series, workers were doing something even more creative. They were turning the entire asteroid into a weapon. Hundreds of nuclear engines, normally used for moving cargo ships, were being attached to the rocky surface. The idea is simple, explained Chief Engineer Nancy Foster to the asteroid's administrator. If enemy ships get too close, we fire all the engines at once. The whole asteroid becomes a giant missile. What about the people living here? The administrator asked. We've got emergency shelters dug deep into the rock, Nancy said. Plus, it'll be the most exciting ride of our lives. Back at Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council was getting reports that confused and worried them. Intelligence Officer Kellenoff brought more disturbing news to his commander. Sir, human preparations are unlike anything in our military databases, he reported. They're converting civilian ships into warships using mining equipment. They're turning farming tools into weapons. They're even weaponizing asteroids. Commander Vex Kaler listened with growing irritation. Are you telling me that a primitive species is improvising their military? Yes, sir. And it gets worse. They're enjoying it. Human communications are full of excitement about the upcoming battles. They're treating war like a game. Impossible, Vex Kaler said. All species fear war. It's natural law. Not humans, sir. They seem to think war is fun. On the research ship Discovery, Captain Jake Sullivan was reading more reports from Earth when Dr. Lisa Parker joined him on the bridge. How are things looking? She asked. Interesting, Jake replied. Earth Command says we'll have the biggest volunteer navy in human history. Over 5,000 ships of all sizes and types. That's a lot of ships, Lisa said. It's not just the ships, Jake continued. It's the people. Look at this report from the Mars colonies. They're sending us cargo containers full of homemade weapons. The kids in schools are designing new battle tactics. Even the retired admirals are coming out of retirement to help. Lisa sat down next to him. Why are we so excited about fighting? Most species avoid war if they can. Jake thought about it for a moment. Maybe because we've never had a good war before. We've always fought each other on Earth. But this is different. This time, all of humanity is on the same side against a common enemy. It's probably the most united our species has ever been. That's actually kind of beautiful, Lisa said. In a violent, explosive way, Jake agreed. As the days passed, both sides continued their preparations. The Galactic Council assembled the largest military force in their history, with traditional fleets following ancient battle formations. They had energy weapons that could destroy planets, shields that could stop any known attack, and tactics perfected over thousands of years of conquest. The humans had cargo ships with mining lasers, farmers with explosives, and a plan to throw rocks really, really hard. In any reasonable analysis, the humans should have been terrified. Instead, they were having the time of their lives getting ready for the biggest fight in galactic history. They were about to teach the galaxy that sometimes the best weapon against superior technology is a complete willingness to try anything that might work. The war was coming, and humanity couldn't wait. The first battle of the war happened in the Alpha Centauri system, where 300 alien warships arrived, expecting an easy victory. The ships were massive and beautiful, with smooth hulls that gleamed like silver and weapons that glowed with deadly energy. They moved in perfect formation, following battle plans that had conquered 100 worlds. Leading the alien fleet was War Prime Vex Enler, a proud warrior from the Crystalline Empire. His flagship was the size of a small city, covered in weapons and protected by shields that had never been broken. He expected the humans to surrender immediately when they saw his mighty force. Instead, he found 12 human ships waiting for him. The human fleet looked like a collection of junk compared to the alien warships. There was an old cargo hauler, 2 converted passenger ships, a mining vessel, and several smaller craft that looked like they had been built in someone's garage. The largest human ship was barely 1/10 the size of Vex Enler's flagship. Captain Ben Rodriguez commanded the human fleet from his destroyer, the Righteous Fury. It was a small, tough ship built for patrol duty, not major battles. Ben was a cheerful man in his 50s who had spent most of his career chasing pirates and smugglers. He had never fought in a real war before, but he wasn't worried. "Unknown ships," Ben said over the radio. "You are trespassing in human space. Please identify yourselves or prepare to be boarded for customs inspection." War Prime Vex Enler couldn't believe what he was hearing. A tiny force was threatening to board his massive fleet. He opened communications with the human commander. "Foolish. Human," Vex Enler said, his crystal body glowing with anger. "I am War Prime Vex Enler of the Crystalline Empire. You face the might of 300 warships. Surrender now or be destroyed." Ben looked around his bridge at his crew. They were all trying not to laugh. "Hold on," Ben replied. "Let me check. If anyone here actually cares about your ultimatum." He put his hand over the microphone and asked his crew loudly, "Does anyone here care about this alien's threats?" "Nope," said his weapons officer. "Not really," added the pilot. "Should we be scared?" asked the communications officer. "I don't think so," Ben replied. He turned back to the microphone. "Sorry, War Prime, whoever you are. Nobody here is impressed. You have 30 seconds to leave our system before we make you leave." Vex Enler was so angry that his crystal body began to flash bright colors. No one had ever spoken to him like this. He had conquered star systems and destroyed entire fleets. These humans would pay for their disrespect. "Attack!" he commanded. "Destroy them all." The alien fleet opened fire with enough energy weapons to level a continent. Bright beams of light shot through space toward the human ships. But the humans weren't where the aliens expected them to be. Instead of staying in formation like proper warships, the human vessels scattered in all directions. They moved in crazy patterns that made no sense to the alien computers. One ship flew straight up, another dove down, and a third actually flew toward the alien fleet instead of away from it. The cargo hauler Defiant, commanded by Captain Rick Turner, charged directly at the alien flagship. Rick's ship was covered in armor plates welded on by his crew, and its cargo bay doors were wide open. "What is that ship doing?" Vex Enler asked his tactical officer. "It appears to be attacking." "U.S., sir," the officer replied, confusion in his voice. "With what weapons?" "I don't see any gun ports." Rick Turner answered that question a moment later. The Defiant's cargo bay was full of metal containers, each one packed with rocks and scrap metal. As the ship flew past the alien flagship, Magnetic, launchers fired the containers like bullets. The improvised projectiles slammed into the alien ship's shields, which were designed to stop energy weapons, not solid objects moving at high speed. Several containers broke through and hit the hull directly, causing explosions and damage alarms throughout the ship. "They're throwing rocks at us," Vexniller shouted. Meanwhile, the converted passenger liner New Hope was using a different strategy. Captain Susan Miller had turned her ship's swimming pools into missile launchers. Instead of expensive military missiles, she was firing empty cargo containers filled with industrial explosives. "Fire Pool 1," Susan commanded. A cargo container shot out of what used to be the ship's luxury swimming pool, spinning through space toward an alien cruiser. When it hit, the explosion was bright enough to be seen from several light years away. The mining ship. Prospector was using its industrial lasers to cut through alien hulls like they were made of paper. These lasers were designed to slice through solid rock. And alien armor wasn't much tougher than granite. Captain Mike Johnson aimed his mining laser at an enemy destroyer. The red beam cut a neat line across the ship's hull, slicing it in half. The two pieces drifted apart, leaking air and sparks. "Well, that worked better than expected," Mike said to his crew. But the most devastating human weapon was something completely new. The destroyer Righteous Fury carried one of Dr. Amy Chun's gravity manipulators, and Ben Rodriguez was eager to test it. "Target that big ugly ship in the center," Ben told his weapons officer, pointing at a massive alien battleship. "Gravity weapon locked on target, sir." Fire. The gravity manipulator didn't make any visible beam or explosion. Instead, the alien battleship suddenly began to twist and bend as gravity around it became 10 times stronger. The ship's own structure couldn't handle the force, and it collapsed on itself like a soda can being crushed. The alien crew barely had time to scream before their ship became a ball of twisted metal. "That's what happens when you don't understand physics," Ben said with satisfaction that the battle lasted exactly 7 minutes. When it was over, 17 alien ships had been destroyed, 43 were badly damaged, and the rest were running away as fast as their engines could carry them. Not a single human ship had been lost, though the Defiant had some scorch marks on its hull that Rick Turner decided to keep as decoration. War Prime, the Sneller's flagship, was one of the ships that escaped, but barely. His beautiful crystal ship was now covered in dents and burn marks from flying rocks and explosions. His bridge crew was in shock, unable to understand what had happened. "How did they defeat us?" asked his tactical officer. "We had superior numbers, better weapons, and stronger shields." Vexeneller stared at the human ships through his viewscreen. They were already cleaning up the battlefield, using their cargo ships to collect useful salvage from the destroyed alien vessels. "They don't fight like any species we've ever encountered," he said quietly. "They use weapons that shouldn't work. They employ tactics that make no sense. They treat war like a game." On the orbital station Haven, Dr. Sam Mitchell watched recordings of the battle with amazement. He was a military historian who had studied space warfare for 20 years, and he had never seen anything like what the humans had just done. "The aliens are fighting a space war," he said to his assistant. "We're fighting a physics war." News of the victory spread through human space faster than light-speed communication. Every colony, every ship, every human settlement celebrated. They had faced the mighty Galactic Council and won their first battle with ease. On the mining world, Kepler 442b, Paul Anderson gathered his colonists for an impromptu party. They grilled meat over open fires and drank homemade alcohol while toasting their distant protectors. "To the crazy humans who throw rocks at spaceships," Paul shouted, raising his glass. "To the crazy humans." A crowd cheered back, but not everyone was celebrating. In the intelligence section of Nexus Prime, Officer Kellenoth was writing a report that would change how the Galactic Council viewed the war. "The humans have revealed capabilities we didn't know existed," he wrote. "They use improvised weapons that bypass our standard defenses. They employ tactics that our computers cannot predict. Most disturbing of all, they seem to enjoy fighting. He paused and looked at the battle recordings again. Human ships moved with a freedom and creativity that no alien force had ever shown. They didn't follow rules or traditions. They simply did whatever worked. Recommendation, he continued writing. We need to completely rethink our approach to this war. The humans are not like any enemy we have faced before. They may be more dangerous than we realized. The first battle was over, but it was just the beginning. Across the galaxy, alien commanders were receiving reports of the human victory with disbelief and growing fear. The species they had dismissed as primitive had just taught them a lesson in warfare, and the humans were just getting started. 3 months after the war began, the Galactic Council was facing a truth they didn't want to admit. They were losing badly. What started as a simple punishment of upstart humans had become a disaster that threatened everything they had built. Over thousands of years, in his private chambers aboard Nexus Prime, Supreme Commander Vex Kaler stared at reports from across the galaxy. Every single battle had ended the same way. Human forces, always smaller in number, had defeated alien fleets using impossible tactics and weapons that shouldn't exist. The humans had done more than just defend their territory. They had begun attacking alien bases and freeing planets that had been under Council control for centuries. Worst of all, the species they liberated actually thanked the humans and asked to join their alliance. How many ships have we lost? Vex Kaler asked his aide. Over 8,000, sir, came the quiet reply. The humans have lost fewer than 200. Vex Kaler closed his eyes. Those numbers meant that humanity was winning the war with barely any effort at all. Meanwhile, Fleet Admiral Dana White was preparing for the largest human offensive in history. Her target was Nexus Prime itself, the heart of Galactic Council power. If she could capture or destroy the massive space station, the war would be over. Dana stood on the bridge of her flagship Indomitable, looking at the fleet assembled around her. There were over 1,000 ships of every size and type. Military destroyers flew alongside converted cruise ships. Cargo haulers with welded-on weapons moved next to luxury yachts that had been turned into missile platforms. Admiral said, her communications officer, we're receiving volunteers from the liberated worlds. The gentle folk of Kepler 438 want to send medical ships. The mining clans of Vega are offering supply vessels. Accept them all, Dana replied. This isn't just a human war anymore. It's a war for freedom. She opened a channel to address her entire fleet. Captains, we're about to attack the strongest fortress in the galaxy. Nexus Prime has shields that can stop a supernova and weapons that can crack planets. By all reasonable logic, we should be terrified. Laughter came back over the communication channel from 1,000 ships. But we're humans, Dana continued. We don't do reasonable. We do impossible. Today we're going to teach the galaxy that bullies always lose in the end. The fleet began moving toward Nexus Prime, traveling faster than light through the twisted space between stars. On every ship, crews were making final preparations. Some were checking weapons, others were saying prayers, and a few were actually taking bets on who would score the first hit on the station. On the converted cargo hauler Liberty Bell, Captain Frank Wilson was explaining the battle plan to his crew of former miners and dock workers. The station has energy shields that can stop our regular weapons, he said. But shields are designed to stop things coming from outside. They don't work so well against things that start inside. What do you mean, Captain? Asked his engineer. A woman named Ruth Clark. Frank smiled. We're going to ram the docking bay doors. Once we're inside the station, the shields can't protect them from us. Ruth looked shocked. That sounds dangerous. Very dangerous, Frank. Agreed. Anyone who wants to leave can take the escape pods now. Nobody moved. These weren't soldiers, just ordinary people who had decided that freedom was worth fighting for. As the human fleet approached Nexus Prime, the massive station began, powering up its defenses. Energy weapons the size of city blocks emerged from hidden compartments. Shield generators that could protect entire planets began to glow with power. But Chief Engineer Carl Brooks had been working on something special for this battle. His invention was called the Oops Drive, and it was probably the most dangerous weapon ever created. It was a faster-than-light engine that had been deliberately broken in very specific ways. "Are you sure this will work?" asked the captain of the research ship Breakthrough. "Absolutely not," Carl replied cheerfully. "It might blow up our ship, tear a hole in spacetime, or accidentally send us to another dimension. But if it works, the way I think it will, Nexus Prime is going to have a very bad day." The battle began when Nexus Prime fired its main weapons at the approaching human fleet. Beams of energy bright enough to outshine stars shot through space, each one capable of destroying an entire ship. But the human fleet didn't try to avoid the weapons. Instead, they used them. The luxury yacht Golden Dream, converted into a fast attack ship, flew directly into the path of an energy beam. At the last second, the ship activated a device that reflected the beam back at the station. The aliens found themselves being attacked by their own weapons. The cargo ship Heavy Lifter used its magnetic cranes to grab chunks of destroyed alien ships and throw them at the station's weapon ports. When a plasma cannon tried to fire through a piece of metal blocking its barrel, the weapon exploded, taking out an entire section of the station. But the most spectacular attack came from Carl Brooks and his Oops Drive. The Breakthrough flew toward the station's main shield generator and activated the broken engine. Space around the ship began to twist and bend in ways that hurt to look at. Reality itself seemed to be breaking down. Then, with a sound that shouldn't have been possible in the vacuum of space, the ship disappeared. A second later, it reappeared inside the station's shield generator, occupying the same space as several important-looking machines. The explosion that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. With the shields down, the rest of the human fleet swarmed over Nexus Prime like angry bees. They found weak points in the station's armor and exploited them with typical human creativity. The passenger liner New Paradise used its dining room's kitchen equipment to spray superheated cooking oil through the station's air vents. The mining ship Rock Crusher used its ore processing equipment to literally eat through the station's hull. Inside the station, Representative Zixthara watched her perfect world falling apart. Alien civilians were running through the corridors, trying to escape the chaos outside. Emergency alarms blared constantly, and the lights flickered as human attacks damaged the power systems. "We have to surrender," she said to the other council members who had gathered in the emergency bunker. "Surrender?" War Prime Vexeneller's crystal body flashed with rage. "We are the Galactic Council. We have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. And now we're losing to a species that attacks us with kitchen equipment," Zixthara replied. "Face reality. The humans have won." Captain Nancy Foster received the surrender message aboard her command ship. She was a small woman who had started the war as a civilian engineer, but the fighting had made her into one of humanity's most successful commanders. "This is Representative Zixthara of the Galactic Council," came the transmission. "We request terms for ending hostilities." Nancy looked around her bridge at her crew. They were all grinning from ear to ear. "Tell them we accept their surrender," she said, "but we have some conditions." The peace negotiations that followed changed the galaxy forever. The old Galactic Council was dissolved and replaced with a new government that gave equal representation to all species, not just the strongest ones. Human colonies became centers of learning and trade. welcoming refugees from oppressive governments and sharing technology with anyone who asked. The restrictive laws that had kept smaller species powerless were removed, but the most important change was in how the galaxy thought about conflict. The humans had proven that wars didn't have to be about conquest and domination. Sometimes they could be about making things better for everyone. Admiral Jake Sullivan, promoted after his role in the early battles, addressed the new Galactic Assembly from Earth. "We didn't want this war," he told the representatives of 200 different species, "but we're glad it happened. It taught all of us something important. The universe is big enough for everyone, as long as everyone plays fair." In the audience, former enemies sat next to former victims, all of them working together to build something better than what had come before. On Kepler 442b, Paul Anderson's mining colony had grown into a small city. Representatives from dozens of species had come to live and work alongside the humans, attracted by their reputation for fairness and their willingness to help anyone in need. "You know what the best part is?" Paul said to his wife as they watched alien children playing with human children in the colony's main square. "What's that?" she asked. "We never did find those ancient burial grounds the aliens were so upset about." They laughed together, and the sound carried across the square where dozens of different species were learning to live in peace. The galaxy had learned something important about humanity. Their greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their tactics, or even their willingness to fight impossible odds. It was their refusal to take themselves too seriously, even when the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. In a universe full of ancient, proud civilizations that had forgotten how to laugh, sometimes the best response to a declaration of war was exactly what the humans had done. They had laughed, rolled up their sleeves, and gotten to work making the galaxy a better place for everyone.